ready and we need to send your.
It should be pulled up already. Yeah, you have a mouse. Got it.
Yeah.
There you go.
But so far, you've made it.
So far, we're almost at the end.
Yeah.
Okay.
Universal.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
To go forward, it's just this.
Yeah, or the mouse if one of them's not working.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. This is the last presentation. So thank you everyone that is still here. I'm going to talk about universal accessibility in transport, but focusing on developing countries. No. Accessibility talks about the design, universal design, and it means that we can make things that serves everyone. So here I selected a picture where we can find people with bags, but also people in wheelchair or with visual impairment or with different personal conditions that need that the environment don't put barriers into their mobility. So as we all know, Sarah already said this when she started her presentation, individuals use transport system daily to carry out activities as studying, working, and recreation. And the existence of a public transport system should allow all individuals to travel throughout the cities, thus granting everyone the same rights to be part of a society. Individuals with disabilities are frequently classified as one of the mostly socially secluded segments of the population to their reduced mobility. And their difficulties with using public transport is one of the most relevant causes. The reality in developing countries is that although many countries have developed regulations and standards to ensure universal design and accessibility in transport modes, those regulations are usually not complied with in developing countries. And within the same developing country, we may see different accessibility in different cities. For example, here I have the case of Santiago in Chile, where you can see that the buses in Santiago, in the capital city, 87% of them have universal accessibility on paper. But if you take the bus, you may find that things are not working, or that you need the help of others in order to get on the bus if you are in a wheelchair. Our metro stations have lifts that have been maintained, but it's only one lift at each station. So if you are on the other part of the road, it might be hard to get there. But in regions outside Santiago, the reality is totally different. Even the sidewalks may not exist, and our buses have this, do not have the lower bus thing. So it's really hard for people with disabilities to move through the city. So I'm going to present several studies that we have been doing in the lines of universal accessibility. The first one that we did with Clemente Mundi and Sebastián Rabot was to understand which are the barriers faced by people with disabilities. And here we made an experiment. So we made them, we selected and invited people with disabilities and also invited other people without those disabilities. So we make them compete in pairs. And they had to get to the same point. And we took the distance and the time that they took each one of them to get there. Since this is an experiment, each one of the volunteers with disabilities had a shadow that was with him all the time, didn't interfere in the experiment, but made sure that, for example, nobody have a hard time or something, because we didn't know what might happen. And we wanted to measure these travel times and also try to see the factors behind these differences we realized that many of these competitors normalized certain conducts. Like for them, it was so normal that people do not respect their rights. But when the shadow was there, he could see that things were not working as they should be. So the shadow gave us some insights also of the movement of the person competing. What we found is that, of course, people with reduced mobility took more time to get to the point where we met all of them. The percentages are 30% more of the time, 37% more of the time. The only one that was reduced mobility was around the same percentages for all the modes. And we found several differences in blindness. People with visually impaired preferred metro. And we found out that metro gave them more information, auditive information. Also, when they were in the metro, they knew exactly where the line was going on. In Santiago, the lines may stop before or after, but it's the same line all the time, not as in New York. Whereas when they're in the bus stop, it's really hard for them to move independently. They do not know which line of the bus is passing, or now that they're electric, less. They don't hear them. So they depend a lot on others. So the variability of their times were harder in buses, were much greater. And we found that we had infrastructure barriers. Our sidewalks didn't help for them to move around. And also we had a lot of cultural barrier, which may not happen in developed countries. But we wanted to investigate a bit further those cultural barriers in the studies that I'm going to show you later on. And we also find out that each disability faces different barriers and needs different solutions depending on the mode of transport. This is something that it was really cool. We made our participants draw mental maps of how they get to the finishing line. And we could see that the volunteers with disability usually, they were not so direct as the competitors. Here is a bike volunteer with disability, and you can see how the lines are really going up and down, whereas the competitor in bike volunteer is much more straight. So for us, we did another study where we wanted to measure how much we value including elements of universal design in our transport modes, because for developing countries, we do not have the money to invest. So we need to prioritize. And many times, elements of universal access are not put in the bag because they are only costs and do not have benefits, measurable benefits. So we did this study in the lines of altruism, and we selected different elements, like the sidewalk was so evident that was in need of more investment. And also in the bus stops, we, from what people told us, especially with reduced mobility or elderly, they needed to sit down, but not just sit down, maybe just have a point where they can, like ischematic seat, which is a bar, not a seat, which makes a lot of effort sometimes. And we found that people want to pay for having more of these elements because they benefit them, but also there is a little bit of altruism, like I want this to be there because maybe other people benefit from it. And it depended on the age, the gender. Women were more altruists. And also the region, people from different regions valued this altruism more than people in the capital. And we had some latent variables going around also to measure this degree of altruism. And we found a time valorization with our elements, and also we managed to put that into money. So our government can value these elements also in the cost-benefit analysis. I made a mistake.
No, you're good.
It's fine. You go where you want. You the previous one, I think.
Got right there.
Then we moved to study people with cognitive disabilities. This is huge because in Chile, maybe more Latin American cultures, but we tend to hide them. We are used to have people with cognitive disabilities around us. So we wanted to understand more about what are the barriers that they face. We used a grounded theory methodology. So we interviewed key actors and people with cognitive disabilities. And they expressed a lot about fear, insecurity in public transport, but also when they made the trip, they felt really proud and independent. The carers, relatives, mom, dad, pass on their fears to them. It's really, really hard, that barrier, because it's not something we can stop. Also, they told us that their trips must be planned in advance, months in advance. They have to learn the trip. They have to learn the bus. They have to learn how to get in the bus, how to recognize the stops. It's really, really hard for them. And mode combination is very difficult. The inclusion of smart cards are a big help. Now there's no change. So for them, it's really easier. And they are in more need of information at stops, in the bus, outside the bus. Social barriers, as I told you, family, but also other passengers and even the transport staff are mentioned as the most important. We made a conceptual plan about different things that interact and are barriers for them. And you can see that study in Sergio Diaz's thesis, but it's really, it was a beautiful experience to learn more about these barriers that hinder their independence. We also made a mimic model with latent variables. And as you can see, of course, there is two variables that we found. One is insecurity, but the other one was disorientation. For the cognitive, people with cognitive disabilities, this disorientation hinders a lot their modes of transport, and it depends on their level of education and also the sensory disability that they have. Whereas insecurity, of course, gender appears too. In our survey, it was not only about people with cognitive disabilities. We interviewed a lot of people, age, and of course, physical disability. Then we wanted also to know more about people with visually impaired, which are visually impaired. And we made also a survey, and we have a mimic model where we found that there are two things that might help them be more independent. One is the knowledge of technological independence. I think the smartphones in this case are a huge help for them to know where they are, to know which bus might be coming, now that the information is even more like quick. It's helping them. And also for them, it's important to have mobility independence, and that we saw more men that are mobility independent, not as much as women, for example. And here are the elements that they value the most. For, on the one hand, is the audiovisual information inside the bus, like they can hear information in the bus, or outside the bus, because they need to know when the bus is coming. And also, there is a help for them if the buses are standard, like they don't change so much depending on where are the seats and where are the doors to go to enter. And our future steps is to understand the elderly needs, their preferences of mobility, what factors influence their travel frequencies and transport mode choices, and what might help their independent mobility. Because as we have seen in our pre-service, there is a lot of caretaking tasks made by the daughters or somebody else, which takes them to the doctor, but we want to know what things may help them being independent. Again, that's something that, of course, everybody wants to.
Thank you very much.